Welcome to Heresy, the Horus Heresy talk show. In this video, we're talking about the Sons of Horus, and we're going to be looking at the Legion rules on Armoury. This is part one of a multi-part video about the Sons of Horus, so do stay tuned for more content on them. We're going to cover their Legion trait and their advanced reaction, their Warlord traits, and also their Armoury options as well. But before we do that, if you enjoy the content, please do leave me a like and subscribe. And if you've got any feedback at all, please leave it down below on YouTube. And don't forget to join the Heresy Discord community as well. A link to that is in the video description too. And now, on with the show. So first of all, let's look at the Sons of Horus Legion trait. It's called Merciless Fighters. And what it does is it means in the first round of combat, whether you charge or get charged, the enemy gets -1 strength to their attacks that hit you. Now, that can swing combat quite a lot. You know, a lot of melee weapons in the game are quite low strength. You know, you think about power axes, which are only swinging at about strength 5. Lots of power weapons are only sort of strength 5 or 6. So, -1 to strength will almost always change the wound roll. And for bigger weapons, particularly we're talking about thunder hammers, which are very common, the biggest thing that this does is it changes instant death thresholds. And it means that your units generally won't be instant deathed by enemy thunderhammers in the first round of combat, which is very, very powerful, especially when we're thinking about elite units like you just hear in Terminators or your command squads fighting against enemy melee units, which will often be armed with thunderhammers. Now, the downside to this trait is it is defensive, and unlike other melee traits like the ones that, you know, maybe the Space Wolves or the World Eaters get, where they help you, whoever you're in combat with, you know, they would just make you kill stuff quicker in combat. This one's defensive, and therefore, if you play against an army that's a shooting army, this trait isn't really going to do a lot for you. You know, not only does it not impact shooting, but when you get into combat, -1 strength against units that were bad in combat anyway doesn't really change a lot. You know, it turns not many hits into slightly less, not many hits. And for that reason, this trait can sometimes feel weak, and certainly when I've played my shooting-based armies against Sons of Horus players, they really feel like their trait's just not doing anything. There is a lot of shooting in the game, and it is a shooting-based game. And even when this trait is active against a lot of armies, it's only going to affect maybe a small, or significantly affect a small number of things that happen across the course of the game. Now, it can impact those things quite a lot. It can be very impactful where it does make a difference, like in those elite fights I mentioned, or maybe your dreadnoughts versus their dreadnoughts, where they're, you know, 1 less to wound you can make a big impact. But overall, it can sometimes have a, you know, lesser effect on the game than you would maybe think it would. The ramming bonus is pretty good as well. I actually am quite a big fan of ramming things, and I think it's one of those things that as people get more experience with the game, they will do more often, and people will come to realize the value of them rams, even from, you know, something like a Rhino. Just extra auto hits is actually a pretty cool thing as well. I think overall this trait can be very impactful where it matters and where it helps, and when you get a matchup where the other person wants to fight you in melee. But the value of the trait overall can vary wildly from game to game. Some games you will feel like you've got no trait or not much of a trait at all, and some games you'll feel like it's got a super strong impact. And for that reason, I think this is a sort of middle of the pack trait in terms of where it compares to what other legions get. The Sons of Horus advanced reaction is called Death Dealers. So this is effectively a return fire reaction, but with a 12-inch range and +1 ballistic skill. Now that's kind of a nice to have, but the limited range does mean that very often you won't get to use it at all in some games, and it's certainly less powerful than the potential of lots of other Legion reactions out there. Now it does have some strange wording, which suggests to me that at some point it was intended to interrupt the enemy shooting action, like it does specifically say before. But later on, it looks like they've tagged on at the end, you know, enemy models that are killed can still attack. So maybe at some point this was an interrupt and they decided it was too powerful, and then it no longer became an interrupt, which would maybe explain why it's a little bit weak. And it is weak. As advanced reactions go, it's probably somewhere near the, you know, bottom of the pile in terms of power level, which is a bit of a shame. But when you do get to do it, particularly if you've got some powerful guns, it can be pretty good. The first Warlord trait for Sons of Horus is called Chosen by the Dark Gods. So every turn you roll a dice. On a 2+, you get +1 strength and toughness till the end of the turn. If you get a 6, you get a wound back as well. If you get a 1, you take a wound instead. So this is kind of nice because anytime you can get something that makes you harder to instant death as a Warlord, because that's how most, Warlord v Warlord fights are decided, is by a Paragon Blade or a Thunderhammer hitting the other person. That's good. Although this does become a bit less useful because you've already got the Sons of Horus trait to do that for you anyway. So the benefit of this is reduced slightly since you've already got something that does it. And it does have a drawback. It is a minor drawback, but it is still a dice roll. So sometimes this won't do anything and will wound you. The healing could be nice sometimes. Some fights between Praetors or heroes do turn into slap fights sometimes where you're trying to knock wounds off each other. So the healing could be nice on occasion, but most of the time won't do anything. And it's got a movement phase reaction, which is not my favourite kind of reaction. I think less impactful than the others. So it's a pretty good Warlord trait if you want to make a fighty Warlord and, get some extra strength for your wounding, a little bit of extra toughness without relying on, the first phase of combat from your Legion trait. But overall, pretty medium, I would say, this trait in terms of impact. Now, following a pattern of many Loyalist or Traitor only Warlord traits when applied to the opposite faction, Wolf of Luna is very good. +1 attack when charging or charged by Traitors is a super powerful buff, and it gives you an assault phase reaction, which is good. Unfortunately, Loyalist only, so the majority of Sons of Horus players won't be able to do this. I don't know what the trend is. There's lots of legions on both sides that get something that is locked to the other side that they would traditionally play that's actually really good, and that seems to happen quite often in the books. It's kind of a weird way that they've been put together, but there it is. So great trait if you're playing Loyalist Sons of Horus. The last one, and my favourite one, is the Armour of Pride. So when you die, you take a leadership test and you heal D3 instead of dying the first time that you die. That should be pretty consistent. You're normally going to be leadership 10 doing this, which is just really good. Doesn't work versus instant death though, and that is a common way for heroes to die. Again, mitigated by the fact we've got the Legion trait, so that's one thing. But it doesn't work against instant death. But it does give you a shooting phase reaction as well. So even though that's not amazing, maybe, the heal of D3, it is certainly not bad, and getting a shooting phase reaction is always good as well. And I do like this Warlord trait. I think it's probably the one I would take most of the time if I was playing Sons. Onto the weapons section, the Armoury section now. So first of all, we've got the Carceran Power Axe. Now this is Strength User, AP 3, Breaching 5, and it's a specialist weapon. It's really just a little bit disappointing, really, especially when you look at the Ultramarine Specialist Weapon, which is just flat AP2, strikes at initiative, no special rules. This needs a 5 to breach, which is not that consistent. The strength isn't very high. It's also a specialist weapon, which means you're not going to gain a bonus attack for using it with a lot of things either. It is an advantage in some ways in that you can pair it with a Power Fist if you've got one, maybe to get +1 attack with the Power Fist. But, that's not a thing you're going to be doing very often, really. It's not a big thing that makes a big difference to the army as a whole. I just think this isn't a very good weapon, and it's so far outside the sort of rules that other Legions special weapons get, particularly given Sons of Horus are meant to be, the death dealers in melee combat as well. It's just a little bit of a disappointment, really. I mean, at least it could have had Rendon 5+, so at least the low strength wasn't a big drawback, and you could maybe, hit tougher things with it, but it doesn't even have that. So not really very good, the Carceran Power Axe. And for most units that use these, like Justarian, for example, you'll be looking to replace them with something better. Then we've got Bane Strike Bolters, the same as Alpha Legion have got. These are pretty good in my opinion. Strength 5, also with that breaching on a 6 as well, is actually pretty good firepower when applied to lots of models that have got the guns. Although I would never use this on Seekers because they've got their own better guns. On Veterans, though, it's okay. Veterans not being the best unit in the world, and a lot of people don't take them. But if you are going to take Veterans, this is a decent upgrade for them. It's pretty good Marine kill and firepower. That can also, knock wounds off things like Dreadnoughts or Terminators as well in a pinch. A nice to have weapon to have access to, but they do cost some points, and they're not super exciting, and the units you would use these on are also not units you're going to take commonly either. Now those two things are it. That is the end of the weapons section of the Armoury for Sons of Horus, which is a little bit disappointing. I feel like either these two things could have been better, or there could have been a few more options in here, particularly for the sort of poster boy Legion for the traitors. But there you go. They got some light rules. But it seems that some of their rules budget in terms of pages was taken up by this consul, the Dark Emissary. So what does he do? Well, he makes allies stubborn if you use them as a compulsory HQ choice. It's a pretty good buff if that is your army theme, if you're doing some kind of like gathered, Forces of the War Master style thing. He's got a 6-inch Aura of Leadership 10 for pinning and morale purposes for any models that are traitors as well, which is quite good. And he gets a free melee weapon with some power weapon-like stats, which is not super exciting, but, it is. He does get it for free as well. So he is 25 points, so not cheap, but not super expensive either. Really, though, the only reason you would use him is if you want to buff allies in some way, because what he provides, the Leadership 10, you would get on a Herald, and it would be better, and also the Herald would make your unit line as well, and also make them fearless. Like, he's like a less good version of a Herald, but for allies. Now, that is a cool thing to have, but I'm not sure how much Sons of Horus allies lists are really like a common theme. So I think a lot of the time you just really won't see this guy getting used a lot, which is a bit of a shame. So in summary, quite a light set of rules for the main traitor Legio, really. Not an awful lot here, and certainly of the stuff they have got, a lot of it is stuff that you don't actually want to use because it's not very good. They've got a very swingy Legion trait. I think it does look better on paper, and certainly I think people consider it to be better than it often performs in game. And I've played against Sons of Horus, and I've seen lots of games against Sons of Horus quite a lot. And I've seen a lot of Sons of Horus players really feel like the Legion trait isn't doing a lot in a lot of games, as much as it does do great things sometimes. They got quite a weak advanced reaction. Their Warlord traits are mostly focused on buffing the Warlord himself, which isn't really where you want to be. The best one's Loyalist only. Weak weapon options that you're going to ignore, and a very situational consul. So overall, not a great set of rules. The Sons of Horus, sort of Armoury and Legion rules, I think they're certainly somewhere near the bottom of the pile. Although, the Legion trait will be great sometimes, but I think taken on balance, on average, I think they're probably somewhere near the bottom in terms of which Legion's got the best out of this section of the book. That's the end of the show. Hope you enjoyed it. If you've got any feedback at all, please leave it down in the YouTube comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe, as well as join us on the Heresy Discord. There's a link to that in the video description. See you all soon. Bye-bye.